We are excited to welcome Governor Pete Ricketts of Nebraska to the program. He is on a mission to stop Joe Biden's 30 by 30 plan, and this is purportedly about fighting climate change and conserving land. But quite honestly, when you look at some of the details that are available, it does look like a federal land grab. Governor, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. And it is absolutely a land grab.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the details of this, and they were really sketchy about what they were releasing and what they were telling people about it. And for me, I just kept thinking back to the Bureau of Land Management under Obama Biden, and that was, I mean, the Bureau of Land Management. That's when BLM stood for something different, and they were very, very aggressive in going after farmers and ranchers. And I mean, they were looking up at the northern Texas, southern Oklahoma, and with this, I mean, it's kind of like the same old. I mean, at least it seems like that to me. This really, Governor, doesn't have anything to do with conservation. So tell us about that for those who may not be familiar.
Yeah, the 30 by 30 plan refers to having 30% of the U.S. land and waters in a permanent state of natural conservation by the year 2030, which of course is only 9 years away. And if you want to put that in comparison, according to the National Geographic, about 12% of our land would be in that category right now, or about 289 million acres. And this would take it up to 729 million acres, or add about 440 million acres on top of that. And the problems with this are really numerous. One, that the Biden administration, the president himself, has no authority to do this. And so our first question was, how do you plan to do that? The second is, what about states like Nebraska, where 97% of our land is privately owned? Are you planning on confiscating land? How do you intend on doing this? We were told that a number of congressional offices also asked the Department of Interior about this plan, and what they responded back was that they were going to use every tool in the toolbox, which to me sounds very scary. And there's a number of ways they could do it. They could do it through lands that are adjacent to national parks or state parks or wildlife refuges. They could use permanent easements, which would permanently lock up land, or they could use it wherever they have that nexus of the federal government on environmental matters to really make those regulations much more onerous. Now, I'll give you one quick example. CRP land land that is put into conservation by farmers and they get paid to do so, they can start putting more environmental qualifications on that, like you have to protect the habitat. In fact, I was speaking with one rancher in western Nebraska who was told that to renew his CRP agreement, he would have to protect the habitat of the swift fox. He says he's never seen a swift fox, and said, what would it mean to protect the habitat? What would that habitat be? And the USDA, which administers the CRP program, couldn't tell them. They didn't know. And that is very troubling, because that means that they're making up rules and that you may not know what you're signing, and then they come back later on and start enforcing these rules and basically take away your property rights. And that's what this really gets down to, is a land grab by the federal government to remove people's private property rights.
Yeah, and that's very interesting, Governor, the whole situation with the fox, because this is something similar that I've read in other parts of the country, where the government's like, we need to protect the habitat of such and such animal. We can't actually define everything about it or what you would need to do this, but we really feel like this is something that needs to be done. But you hit upon something incredibly important to me, where we've been having this larger discussion in the country about the shadow of Marxism and the prevailing Marxist culture that is sweeping across the nation. I mean, I'm just saying, if you were promoting Marxist culture or a Marxist, economic principle, obliterating people's private property rights is a great first step.
Yeah, and I think it's important to know where the genesis of all this comes from. It's coming from the United Nations. Back in 1992, they are the ones that started setting goals for how much land should be in conservation. And there's also a movement out there called the Half Earth movement, which is really setting aside half the Earth's land and water into this permanent natural conservation. And all of this is really only able to happen if you have a federal takeover of that land. If the federal government really believed in conservation, if that was the goal, they would leave it up to us here in Nebraska to determine that, because nobody cares more about our land and water than we do, and our air than we do here in Nebraska. In fact, through conservation efforts that we've had here and this regulatory scheme we've set up in our state, we've kept things like our Ogallala Aquifer, which is one of the largest underground aquifers in the world. In Nebraska, it's within 1 foot of where it was back in the 1950s because of the good management practices we've had here. So our farmers and ranchers were the original conservationists. They were the ones that wanted to pass on the family farm and ranch to the next generation. We don't need the federal government coming in here and taking away our private property rights in the name of conservation. We do a great job here. And by the way, according to U.S. News and World Report, Nebraska has the 6th best natural environment. Delaware, the president's home state, has the 6th worst. Maybe the president should focus on his home state of Delaware and leave us alone here in Nebraska.
Yeah, Governor, it sounds like your state of Nebraska has it really figured out. And that's one of the other points that you brought up that I find really troubling is that they've never actually explained, when you're talking about Nebraskans and elsewhere in the country, these people's private property. I mean, this sounds like eminent domain, but they don't want to actually go out and say that that's what they're going to invoke.
Yeah, and it's something that, like, for eminent domain, you've got to have a purpose that you're doing. This is just for national conservation. So again, there's no authority to actually do this.
Right.
The president would have to work with Congress to get something passed. And that's why I led a group of 15 governors to send the president a letter asking for more details about what the president actually meant by this 30 by 30 plan.
And isn't there, I mean, if memory serves, a significant number of land, state by state, a significant percentage of land that is already federally regulated. It's just not clear to me as to why the federal government thinks that there needs to be more put into conservation, because as you said, the people who best know this land are the farmers and ranchers and the people who own it, not these bureaucrats in the United Nations, some of whom have never even stepped foot in this country, much less middle America.
Yeah, this, as I mentioned, goes back to the UN starting this. And then there was a Center for American Progress paper published in August 2019 that set out the 30% goal. And it's not based on any science or any data. If you look at the references that they have in their paper, it's mostly referring back to the press releases of other environmental groups. So there isn't any really data or science behind why they picked 30%. And of course, if you thought that when they got 30% they would stop, that's just not the case. They're going to continue to push until they get that 50% number, which is ultimately these radical environmentalist goals.
Yeah, oh, this is something else. Governor, now I understand you're having town halls across the state to raise awareness, although I think a lot of people, from the discussion I've seen online, a lot of people are very aware of what's happening here, but you're doing a number of town halls across the state of Nebraska, and I know a number of other elected officials have been reaching out to their constituents. Tell me what you would most like people to walk away with, what information that they can walk away with, and what they need to do to help you fight back against this.
Yeah, what we're trying to do with our town halls, and we get a couple hundred people showing up to these town halls are well attended, is to really make them aware of how all the different ways the federal government might do this. The big message is, look, we often think of DC being far away and the fights there maybe don't relate to our lives directly. But in this case, we're the front line in Nebraska. We're in the trenches here because the federal government is looking to do this in a number of different ways, such as permanent easements, the CRP land, land next to wildlife refuges and things like that. So we're asking people to be on guard and aware in their local areas. They're going to try to do this in a stealth way. They say it's voluntary, but they're really meaning not voluntary. They're going to try and find ways to force people to do it through regulation. And we need to be on guard in a local way to find those places where the federal government's going to try and do that so that we can be taking steps to mitigate that, prevent that, educate people. Don't just sign a new contract. Read the fine print. Understand what they're trying to accomplish. Because if you sign something that, for example, puts land into permanent easement, that never gets fixed.
Oh yeah, that's once it's done, it's done and set. Oh my goodness, yeah, this is, I mean, it's troubling, and I'm glad, and I'm just looking at just some of my latest information. I'm just glad that you're raising awareness of this and making and bringing people to speed on all of this. Governor Pete Ricketts, thank you so much. I know we talked on radio. I'd love to have you on again, either here on No Apologies or on radio too. Thank you, Governor, for your time. I appreciate what you do.
Great. Well, hey, thank you very much, Dana. I would love to come on again.
Of course. All right, folks, next up, my friend, actor and filmmaker, and if I don't say Peabody Award winner, that's going to be the first complaint I'll hear when I have him on. Nick SEARCY is going to join us to discuss woke Hollywood and his latest documentary, America, America, God Shed His Grace on Thee. Keep it here. So folks, after the program, I want all of you to visit this website, preparewiththefirst.com. It is a special website set up by our friends at My Patriot Supply. And every day it seems like, things are kind of nuttier, right? I mean, who knows? I mean, the best way to have peace of mind is to have your emergency food and water rations, right? I have my prepper pantry. Do you? My Patriot Supply is America's leading preparedness. I have some of that in my prepper pantry, by the way. It's the leading preparedness company. They're here to help you become self-reliant. So no matter what happens next, you're ready. But you can't wait for something bad to happen and then react. You should act now before there's like a stock market crash or hyperinflation, civil unrest. You know what? Let me put it this way. Act now and don't be like the people in all the zombie movies that have to leave their safe, secure area to go out and forage for food and supplies, because you want to have that all in your prepper pantry, okay? My Patriot Supply has been in business for over a dozen years, serving millions of families and earning 39,000 four-star and five-star reviews. Their food, specially packaged to stay fresh for up to 25 years. So when you prepare today, it'll be there when you need it. Right now, you can save $50 on their 4-week emergency food kit at preparewiththefirst.com. The meals are delicious. They provide 2,000 calories per day. No other brand comes close. That's preparewiththefirst.com.